want to do this by disseminating the latest news on warning letters. This meeting is recorded, and the topic today is data forgery and FDA warning letters. We will videotape it to make it available, as you just heard the start recording, and copies of this presentation will be available to others. If you have any topics of interest that you'd like to see presented in the future, please don't hesitate to let us know. We work to accommodate topics as much as we can. And also at the end of the session, if you have questions, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat or voice them here. I'm pleased to present and have John English as our featured guest speaker. And we can go from there.
Okay, good afternoon, or whatever time zone you're in, to everyone.
John, would you like to start from this slide?
I thought you were going to add another couple of items there. Forgive me. There's a little humor in this presentation, except of course that it's not really funny. But you can't have data without integrity. I'd like to talk about the general problem of forgery or data forgery in FDA documents, 483s as well as warning letters. I'll talk a little bit about the problem, a little bit about myself. Then we'll review several somewhat recent documents, both in the US and in the OUS, and then close up with a summary and a reminder, don't let George do it. Nothing to do with the George here. It's a couple of real events. And of course, in my presentation time, I always rely on Dilbert. And as you can see, you can't have compliance without lions. It's supposed to be funny. It's not. There's a lot of untruth in our industry, and we need to find it and deal with it. George, can I have control to advance the slides, please?
Absolutely, John. You should be able to just hit spacebar to advance.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Spacebar is not working. Just latency. Sorry. Sorry, folks. The internet is totally reliable, except when it's not. I'd like to begin with a tale from New Jersey that involves my family and involves a company. In 2005, we had a bit of a family crisis. And I walked into the living room and said, what can I do to help? And I was told, you can shut up so I can decide if I'm having a heart attack. I said immediately, where are your pills? The reply, I don't know. Wrong answer, where are your pills? Try my purse. Gave her the pills. And she said, what do I do with them? I said, put it under your, put one under your tongue. And then, of course, having said that and having her doing that, I thought, I must be wrong. Let me look at the bottle. Nothing on the bottle label was clear anymore except Able Labs. That was a bit of a shock. I called the pharmacy, got through the robot, got through the nice young woman who said, you know, I can help you, I can help you. And I finally said, I need to talk to George now. George was the head pharmacist. So I said, George, her nitro pills are from Able Labs. He said, don't let her take them. Too late. So I went up and got a fresh set. This was a real life, and he said, these are made by Pfizer. These are good. That's not a commercial. That's just a direct quote. Called that a regulatory jolt in real life. I knew about Able Labs. I had the 483. Just a reminder to all of you, when you hear or read about prescription information or read a warning letter? How often do you check the medicine cabinet, which is also an arcane name for New Jersey, the medicine cabinet of the US? I can tell you I had 15 years of GXP experience at that point, but I never checked, admittedly, prescriptions we never used. So it's something you need to think about. Okay. As for the 483, it had 15 pages. It had 12 observations, and the copy I have was unredacted. The only thing they redacted was the signatures of the FDA personnel. I gave GKS a copy of that particular PDF to post if they choose to. First observation, quality unit failed to review electronic data as part of batch release or review the audit trails for the water and power data system. What was happening was the staff were taking good data and pasting it again and again to release product. There is no warning letter, and I'm aware of, for Able Labs, for the simple reason that, as the 483 said, they already said they would cease all their manufacturing, cease the distribution of the drug products, and recalled over 3,000 batches of products. You don't need a warning letter. Instead, you had prosecution. Just an attempt at humor, I read a real warning letter for Sun Pharmaceuticals a few years after that. And after I had read it, I went back and something bothered me. It was the address. Sun was using the old Able Labs facility. If you look in the highlights at the bottom, when FDA inspected, it was found that a number of the stability lots had imploded and no one had noticed, which is why I call it the curse of Cranberry, New Jersey. I'm sure someone's still using that building. I've never had to go there, thank goodness. Now, I had promised George that I would update things if there was a last minute change, something interesting. Well, I can't do that. Yesterday's FDA's update was 79 different warning letters were put out on the main FOIA page. In addition, there's close to another 60 or 70 on the OPDP page about drug advertising. So we're going to just go ahead with what I wanted to do, and I won't try to plow through those 79 letters. But as you can see, and this is the end of the list so that I could document for you how many of there were, you'll recognize the names of some of the companies. And there'll be other companies you've never heard of. Okay. Now, when I first thought about this presentation, I thought I should, there's a lot of history to bring up and everything. Well, Able Labs is history. But really, we're having a lot of current examples of data fraud. And the first one I picked was a compounding pharmacy called Boothwyn Pharmacy, 20 years later. Boothwyn is indeed a town in Pennsylvania. I've worked there and I've lived there. But the Boothwyn Pharmacy letter was sent to Kennett Square, which is known as the mushroom capital of the world. At least they say that. It's a compounding pharmacy in the veterinary space. And they're quite busy there. The warning letter has two parts. First, unapproved new drugs. They're putting out drugs without identifying the species. A dog is not a cat, is not a pig, is not a cow. That's not good for veterinary. These aren't specific ones made for specific patients, just as we'd expect find ones made for specific people at a compounding pharmacy. They were making copies of approved products and making them in bulk, if you will, without patient-specific prescriptions. The interesting part of the drug quality violations. Okay. What did we learn at Able Labs? It was about out of spec, excuse me, out of spec, blank. Yeah, out of spec results. This particular company had the same problem and they failed to keep accurate records as well. What was the blank? Yes. What was the, who was the culprit here? The pharmacist in charge altered the C of A's. Now, you'll see a number of warning letters where they say you don't have certificates of analysis or you don't look at them. Here, they indeed sent their product out to third party and they got C of A's that came back unacceptable. So the head pharmacist changed them. And it says he changed them so that the FDA wouldn't have as much to worry about looking at. And then he also created false records of observations, excuse me, of investigations, showing that where there were problems in where some of the C of A's weren't changed, no, the people who got the drugs had no problems and there were no adverse reactions. So there were no investigations, there were no calls, and the PIC admitted he made all this up. The FDA's reaction to it was, as you can see, we can't assess the accuracy because of the steps you took. So we really can't trust your data. We don't know what to do next. This is June of 2025. There were a pair of letters in July around the GLP area. We don't see those very often, thank God. There was a set of them. The second one came out first for Jiangsu Kerbio Medical Tech in China. The image that follows is from violation 1, page 3. And given what happened in that, the reason why the second violations even had to be written is interesting. Okay. The issue here was the raw data from multiple studies showed that you had 2 different directors, but the same person doing similar study-related activities on the same equipment at the same time. That's very efficient, but it's most likely not possible. As they say at the bottom, and they're being very charitable, the activities that are being performed appear implausible. This item D had a classic GLP issue. Well, 2. 1, the records were being completed in front of the investigators, showing that they were backdating the results. And if you look in the box, there was animal reuse. The first GLP study found animals resurrected. In other words, animals sacrificed in one study were alive in another at a later date. In this warning letter, it's that they're supposed to be animals that have never been used, but the lab was reusing them to gather more data. As I said, there were 2 GLP letters. This was the older one, but it was published second. They were inspected by OBMI, which apparently is the new BIMO, in January of 2025. And then the prior letter, the inspection began the day after. So it shows that FDA is getting out into the field and they're being very efficient about it. Zephaniah, am I not?
I think you're good now.
Okay. Consistency is a virtue. But as we see here, the study records for 4 different study directors across 9 studies contained 6, I guess you'd call it, real pages of data, but they were photocopied across the different studies, along with the technician signatures. It's very troubling. And multiple examples where the photocopies were done only a week after. We have a slide here, which as you can see, for completeness, I'm sorry, I'm just realized my pointer is not visible to you. It's only visible to me. We have a set of analysis the FDA did on the study protocols showing where photocopied data was placed. They actually look, and if you leave something there, they will find it. Now let's come back to the US. This is somewhat recent. It's July. It's Catalent in Indiana, although I suppose we should call it Novo now. To be honest, I had expected there was a warning letter for this, and we looked and looked for it. But even though this facility has an interesting regulatory past, it never got a warning letter. This 483 followed up on their prior 483s. As you can see from the first item, their spectrophotometer wasn't capable of saving and retaining electronic data. They didn't have a method of reviewing the data as it happened, and they never backed up the data. Violations of regulation. Your quality unit doesn't review audit trails. Not a surprise. Then item D was most interesting to me. The user login feature was either disabled or inaccessible, which again prevented the review of data or the audit of data. They then went through the data integrity assessment and remediation plan. And in the process of going through that, they found more systems that had gaps and problems. When you have this many issues, the question is, what else is there? Since there's no way to capture the information, how can you be sure? I'm sure Peter Baker would have a lot of fun with this one. Let's skip back to India, NATCO. As I said, the image speaks for itself. Let me give you a minute to try to read it, assuming it's large enough for your screens. Again, the same problem. The electronic data doesn't match the printed data, and the printed data or hard copy is what's used for making decisions and making release. This is fraud, if you like. It's built into the system. It also, Excel is normally castigated as being a problem in different sites. USB keys are just the same. There was a warning letter a number of years ago in China where first the investigators had been blocked from a room. And then when they were allowed, someone ran away with a USB key. He eventually returned with the USB key and the data was available to be reviewed. But the question is, was that the same USB key? No chain of evidence there. And And again, as you see, this is June of 2025. If you want evidence of fraud, if you want to learn about fraud problems, the evidence is here. It's just a matter of reading through. I think it's fair to say we went a little more quickly than I intended, but let's summarize this way. After 20 years, I don't think the industry has learned all that much. At Able Labs, the driver for fraud was financial. There was stock price, there were stock options. There was also the fact that certain of the staff had visas that would not be sponsored if they didn't perform their work properly or the company had problems. The Kennett Square letter feels the same way. Results were pushed through by someone who had the ability to change the results. And I can only assume, which we know what that does, that it was done for the motive of making sure product got out and bonuses got paid. Now, when it comes to your data, your procedures, and whether or not your people are following them, let's talk about George. Again, not our George and not my pharmacist. A number of years ago, I went to a site that had been cited for problems with data retention. When I went to the toxicology section, I asked them, well, now, how do you archive your data? And they said, we don't. May I ask why? Yes, our system, well, it archives it, but when we try to bring the studies back, they're just X's and O's, they're meaningless. So we don't archive. Well, how do you keep the data? Oh, we keep it all online. Storage is cheap. Really? Okay. How are you sure no one changes the studies if you don't archive them? Oh, we use the close function. Assume I'm dumb, sir. What does it do? Oh, when the study is closed, we close it and no one can change anything. Have you tested to make sure no one can? The manager picked up his phone and says, George, come in here. The guy's name. He comes in and says, boss, I'm busy. What do you need? He said, John is asking me questions about the close function, and I just don't want to answer him. Would you explain to him why we know it works? And the answer was, John, we would never, ever use the close function here. Because if you close a study, someone could archive it. And yes, we can archive it, but if we archive it, we destroy the data. So we would never, ever use the close function because someone might archive it. Now, I'm kind of busy. Do you have any other questions? I said, your boss called you in. Why don't you ask him? His face was on the blotter, and he just said, no, George, you've done enough. You can have procedures. You can have SOPs. You can have things you think people are doing, but you need to find out that they're actually doing it and verify that, in this case, the close function was used, or that people are actually recording the data in the hard copy that's in the soft copies all right. I don't think human nature has changed much in 20 plus years. And we need to keep observing that what people do is actually what they're supposed to do, and that the data we get is the data we expect. We can't be perfect. We can just try real hard.
Hey, John, this is Dan Barreto. A great presentation, so very much appreciated. But I wanted to ask you a question. You know, since we went from hard copy predicate rule documentation, which at the time represented a challenge from a data integrity perspective. Companies have been adding computers and computerized systems with the understanding on their site that the addition of these computers and electronic systems will add a certain level of security in terms of data integrity prevention. But that has not apparently been the case. Why do you think that is?
Partially because lack of training, and partially because if you think about it, and this is old, it's much more convenient to have a single ID and a single password somewhere on a bulletin board that anyone can take to make sure the information gets done, and maybe it's done in some cases because you're short on staff, you're short on training, and you just want to get the product out. That's the emphasis. The idea of patient safety is sort of secondary because after all, we're following an approved process. So it has to be right. I don't know if that's a good answer.
No, I think that's a great answer. Thank you very much. But I think that to supplement your point, I think it's also important to continue to emphasize on the importance that documentation review has, in terms of the work that the quality assurance organization has to do, the work that people other than quality assurance have to do. Whenever a signature is put into a document, that means that if you did the review, that you did the review in such a way that now you're certifying that the data that you are signing for, it's good. And then, of course, sometimes you have different levels of review. So I think the point is well taken, but obviously making sure that, those individuals who are responsible for documentation review, that they actually do the work, that they do the work correctly. And it's not just about signing, it's about reviewing.
And never sharing passwords, but that's.
Of course.
Yeah, you just reminded me of that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, John, so much for sharing and speaking, and happy to open it up for questions as well. Even briefly give some updates from the GKS side of things. We're happy to be sponsoring and putting these webinars on every month. Just from our end, Zephaniah and I will be at the product show for ISPE Boston, Gillette Stadium on October 1st. So we are excited to be announcing our table, booth E34. We have our next month's Warning Letter Wednesday. Announcements will be made to all attendees. We'll also share a recap of this month's. We've got new blogs and a lot of great notes from PDA Regulatory Conference, which happened last week. American Society for Quality had a conference last week. We've already put up notes and slides from there. And RX360 hosted their first ever conference. Zephaniah attended. So as we develop our new AI features and products, and stay tuned, and we look forward to sharing all of this information with you guys. I guess I'll bring it back to questions. See, Jacqueline had the question. If you'd like to come off mute.
Okay, there we go. I work in quality assurance. I have more than 25 years of experience in ITQA. And one concern I have now, talking about reviewing content, when I review a document, before I sign off and I'm the final signatory, I make sure that the person who authored that document has the training, education, and experience to have authored that document. That's fairly easy to confirm. Now, and it happened most recently on my last project, they're using artificial intelligence to generate content. So I'm reviewing a document, and at this point, I'm not working. I'm eager to get back to my environment, but what I'm going to ask, and I'm not sure, maybe this is already being done, for an attestation, because when I'm asked, what is my signature, what does it represent, I'm attesting to whatever I'm signing off on, that it's accurate, it's complete, whatever. Now I'm getting content from an author who maybe used AI to generate the content. I don't know where they got that information. I don't know who trained that tool, that AI tool. So I don't even know, how far back to go to say this is accurate. So I'm not looking forward to going into that environment, but I'm afraid that's where we are. So at minimum, I'm going to ask the question, did you use AI to generate this document in full, in part, or not at all? I want a signature from the author. But any thoughts on AI for content generation and data integrity?
Yeah, I think this is Dan. Very good questions, Jacqueline. And from my perspective, anything that documentation that is generated should be verified as accurate. In other words, just because you got it from an AI source, it does not mean that it's 100% accurate. I think that AI, like anything else, is part of an evolution that is taking place. So AI is input output. So it depends also on the information that it's provided, so that AI does its own analysis. So from my perspective, you shouldn't take anything for granted. You have to verify. Assume that AI is just another operator that is bringing you information, and you need to make sure that that information is correct. That will be my recommendation. George, I think you have maybe a comment.
Yeah, happy to, John, if John would like to go, but I definitely have a couple of comments on this one. Jacqueline, excellent question. I would say there were a lot of similar stories resonated with the American Society for Quality Audit Division. And some of the topics that start to come to mind very quickly are, what is the company's AI policy and procedure? Are they even able or should be allowed to generate any documents with AI? If they're doing so, and it's not explicitly stated in policy and procedure, then that even furthermore begs the question about at least some form of attestation or acknowledgement, right? If there's none of those things, those are deep red flags for sure. I would say that these are things that you should be thinking about and asking for. I think a lot of stories were shared at ASQ Audit around potentially AI generated documents, and exactly, are they being read, followed, or signed? If so, by who?
I'll just throw this in. I think of AI, probably naively, as basically a research assistant. They give you information, but you have to check it. The first time I used AI, I did a very simple query. It was not regulated. And the information it gave me back, I looked at it and I knew it was wrong. Then I went to the supporting documents, and in the supporting documents, the correct number was there, but it decided to create the summary using an older number. And I'll, as George says, what is their policy? Frankly, I don't think something generated purely by AI should be going to quality. A subject matter expert should be taking it, reviewing it, perhaps adding some value, and signing for it, attesting to it, then passing it to quality. And on the flip side, I wish I had the reference, but I don't. A company is in the clinical space, in the research space, is intentionally making their AI hallucinate to see if it comes up with a solution that they wouldn't have thought of. But it isn't doing that for final. It is doing it to take data and then see if they can come up with something else. So in a way, it almost makes AI human.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point, the one you just brought, John. So, and for Jacqueline and the rest of the team, we are the ultimate responsible for the documentation that is generated, regardless of the source. In the end, it's about our signature. So if we extract anything from AI and we make it our own, as if it was our own property, because we vouch for it, we are still the ultimate responsible entity for that. It's not going to be AI. It's going to be us, because we're the ones who are using the information. So I think it's also very important to understand that under the regulatory compliance expectations that we live under, AI is not responsible. We are. It's the company. So regardless of the tools that we use, in the end, we have to take responsibility and accountability for the tools that we use.
Jacqueline, hopefully that answers your question. If you have any other follow-up, I would also note that we're seeing two very distinct and different paths with FDA and EMA, both guidance and the sort of approaches being taken towards how AI is viewed. I think John's point around research tooling is really excellent, because situational awareness is the most important part. But yeah, I think more to come from that. Looks like there's a question in the chat I'll read out for John and Dan and anyone else who would like to comment. But Heidi asks, with the updates coming for Annex 11 and USP 1058, do you imagine we'll see more 483s calling out gaps with a lack of risk assessments or insufficient risk assessments with legacy equipment that isn't there? Also, how do you think a lot of the vendors' software is missing gaps in DI because the end user has not pushed for more compliance and just accepted because we have no other choice? So it's kind of two parts. I can reread it.
John, you want to go first?
You could go ahead, Dan. I'm trying to.
Yeah, I think that
Split them in half.
if I understand the question in general, because it's a very compounded question, I think what's really important here is to understand that computerized systems, based on Part 11 requirements and also European requirements, you have to meet certain expectations, right? From a security perspective, documentation control perspective. So that means that your computerized systems or computers have to be validated to ensure that you fulfill those expectations. From my experience, what I've seen is that a lot of companies still, do not have systems that can be validated. So those systems have a continuous gap. And because of those gaps, then you create opportunities for data integrity issues to be generated. The second one is where you have the systems that have been validated because they are actually compliant. And then things happen like what John was talking about. I'm sharing now my password with somebody else. So now, even though the system is validated and it has the capability of giving unique passwords to each individual, the companies do not really understand how important this is. And I think that's also part of the problem. And number three, I think it's even when you have computerized systems in place that have been properly validated, if you cannot keep track of the history of the document, meaning doing the right audit trail review, you are going to miss things that happen in the background. So because the document that you're looking at does not necessarily include input from the audit trail. So for me, audit trail review is extremely important to be done. And we could have a discussion as to how frequently this needs to be done. And I know there's different perspectives on this. But I guess the issue is really, does the industry in general have a good understanding of exactly when we have systems that are not compliant, what sort of remediation activities do we have in place? And or when the systems that we have are compliant, are we actually using the systems correctly? So that will be my perspective from a general point of view. John?
I'm sorry, I had a point and I lost it. So I'll say I don't have anything to say.
Yeah, super. Thank you both, John and Dan. One other comment Daniel left was EU will issue Annex 22 soon. US and FDA don't seem to be in a hurry to regulate AI use in our industry. I would note, Daniel, similar sentiment at ASQ audit. The FDA has come out with less approaches. And so this is definitely a downstream versus upstream approach to how the use cases will be assessed. And we may see this in penalties. We've seen some warning letters already mentioning certain types of AI systems from the FDA. I agree with sort of we're seeing two diverging approaches for certain.
I think we have two questions, one from Jacqueline and one also from Lydia. But yeah.
Yeah, Jacqueline, if you'd like to go, I think you should be able to mute.
The participant list says she's
There we
on
go.
mute.
Okay,
Ah.
there we go. And let me lower my hand too. I'll do that after that. John, a question for you. When you see data integrity, lapses in data integrity, which would call into question the data included with a submission. At what, well, I'm going to read it. I'll read a question to you because this is a question I've put to others. Could there be a situation when a commercially manufactured drug product that presents a serious risk to patient safety or has little or no therapeutic value be reclassified as a counterfeit product? And there could be a qualifying legal threshold to be deemed counterfeit. But when does a product that's whose the data that's submitted with an NDA or not IND, but just an NDA or for a marketed product? I can go back to that. But when that data is called into question, could that marketed product be considered counterfeit? Like, is there a legal threshold when you call into question the quality of the product or the risk to patient?
I only went to Seton Hall Law School. I'm not a lawyer.
Okay.
That is a question that is beyond my experience. I'm sure David Chesney, if he were here, would have any number of things to say.
I'll have to put that in
Well,
the loop.
maybe I can. I think that we have to make a distinction between what is a counterfeit product from a definition perspective. And if you follow the FD&C Act, the FD&C Act says that a product that contains that type of information that is unacceptable basically will be pretty much classified as misbranded. For it to be counterfeit, it really has to meet the counterfeit definition, which is a Me Too product that is intended to be sold as that product, which is not. So from my perspective, if you make a submission, and I've dealt with this before, what's really going to happen is that if you do it and you're caught, your product obviously is not going to be approved. But the most important classification that you're going to find is that it's going to be misbranded. But in addition to that, you could be also subject to criminal liability. So the company would be in a lot of trouble because that falsification is not just a GMP issue, it's also a criminal issue.
Yes, yeah. And the product, I mean, if it's a marketed product, it could be withdrawn, it could be recalled, it could be withdrawn.
Absolutely.
To product shortages. I know there are different definitions. I look at the WHO also has a good definition for counterfeit because they have a separate area that looks into this. But, you know, suspicious, falsely labeled, contaminated, adulterated. I mean, there are any number of characteristics that apply to conclude that or to suspect that investigate if it is in fact counterfeit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I would say, Jacqueline, misbranded would be probably the most, the term that I would probably consider using in that case.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And thanks everyone.
Super. I think Lygia had a question. That might be it. If there's no other questions in the chat, we'd again just like to say thank you for joining. Thank you, John, for this incredible
welcome.
presentation. It's well appreciated, and your stories and insight I've looked up to on LinkedIn for a long time. I think your posts are incredibly valuable around some of the latest updates from the agency. So thank you. We look forward to doing this again next month and hopefully for more great discussion and collaboration. Any final questions as we wrap up?
I have to say, I'm very excited about the questions that have been asked with respect to AI and how AI is going to change the world of regulatory compliance. And I think that, you know, we're basically trying to now, all of us trying to really learn and appreciate exactly the impact that AI is going to have in our lives for the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years or so. So I think this is really very important, and it's something that, George, we need to sort of consider to talk about more as part of these presentations, because I think there's a lot of questions and the answers are not all there.
Without a doubt, Dan, I think that was the sentiment Zeph and I have gotten from being on the road with conferences over the last 2 weeks. And I think it will be important to sort of share and reverberate notes from some of these industry groups that leadership in their respective categories. So thank you for that. Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for joining. I think we will conclude the meeting. For those that asked around credit for attendance for ASQ or orgs like that, we are happy and we will share the certificate as well as the recap. So thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a happy Wednesday.
Thank you all.
Thank you, John.